It began with a problem. Not of courage, nor of guns, but of blindness. By late 1943, in the steaming jungles of New Guinea, the U.S. Sixth Army was fighting an enemy it could seldom see. Japanese movements vanished into the canopy. Maps were months out of date, aerial photos blurred by mist, patrol reports riddled with guesswork. Lieutenant General Walter Krueger, a reserve strategist from Texas and a veteran of the Great War, called it a war fought against ghosts. To win, he decided, the Army needed men who could become ghosts themselves. On November 28, 1943, Krueger issued a directive, the formation of small, elite reconnaissance teams that would infiltrate enemy territory, collect intelligence, and return unseen. They would be volunteers, carefully chosen from combat units hardened by the New Guinea campaign. The concept was experimental, unorthodox, almost reckless. The Sixth Army's G2 staff thought it impossible. Krueger disagreed. He envisioned a breed of soldier who could slip through Japanese lines, survive in isolation, and report with precision rivaling a camera lens. Word spread quickly through the muddy camps around Port Moresby and Finschhafen. Volunteers lined up, many of them veterans of the 32nd, 41st, and 24th Divisions. Out of hundreds, only 138 were ultimately accepted. Their selection was brutal: 2 weeks of unrelenting tests, jungle navigation without compass, silent movement at night, physical endurance marches in choking humidity. Those who faltered were dismissed without ceremony. The survivors were assigned to the newly created 6th Army Special Reconnaissance Unit, soon to be known, informally and forever, as the Alamo Scouts. Their training took place near Finschhafen and later at Ferguson Island, in a clearing hacked from the jungle. There were no parade grounds, no barracks, only rain, mud, and silence. The men were taught to live as the enemy lived, to move without sound, to find water and roots, to read terrain by smell and sound. They learned to paddle rubber boats through coral channels at night, to signal by mirror and wire, to memorize entire coastlines after a single flyover. Each scout carried a compass, map case, carbine, and a few days of rations. Often, that was all. Krueger's staff, skeptical at first, began to notice something unusual. The scouts were not simply surviving, they were excelling. Instructors reported an absence of fear reaction under stress. During mock infiltrations, they vanished into the rainforest and reappeared 3 days later behind enemy lines. They operated in 6-man teams, self-sufficient, self-commanding, untraceable. Their creed was simple: see without being seen, report without being caught. Every man understood the arithmetic of their mission: failure meant annihilation. The jungle was not neutral ground. It consumed the unprepared with fever, leeches, and silence. Yet the scouts thrived in it, adapting to its rhythms. They learned to recognize the faint tang of Japanese rice cooking downwind, to tell friend from foe by the flick of a machete in moonlight. By December 1943, the first detachment, Detachment 1, was ready. Its commander, Captain Horton V. White, a quiet Kansan with eyes like frost, reported directly to 6th Army headquarters. Krueger met the men personally, speaking little but watching closely. His final order was succinct: you will operate where we cannot. Return with truth or not at all. No one then could have guessed that these 138 men, scattered across the Pacific's front lines, would go on to complete 106 missions behind enemy lines without losing a single man. Their legend would remain classified for decades. But in that rain-soaked clearing on Ferguson Island, as the men broke camp and vanished into the jungle for the first time, the pattern of their war was already forming: a war of silence, patience, and invisibility. They were America's eyes in the dark. And in the months ahead, they would see everything. The first mission began without ceremony: no bugles, no send-off, no trace. At dawn on February 27, 1944, 6 men from Detachment 1 paddled silently through the glassy surf off Los Negros Island in the Admiralties. Their objective was simple in order but deadly in execution: determine whether the Japanese garrison on the island's northern coast still held its positions. What intelligence officers in Brisbane had were aerial photographs obscured by mist. What Krueger needed was truth. The men, Captain Horton White, Sergeant Thomas McGowan, Corporal Joe Moan, and 3 others, moved inland through mangrove and razor grass. Each step was deliberate, toes rolling to muffle the crunch of coral fragments. They had been inserted by PT boat under blackout conditions, 12 miles from the nearest American position. Behind them, the sea swallowed their wake. Ahead, the jungle pressed close, heavy with humidity and rot. For 2 days they moved by night, resting in silence by day beneath fallen palms. Their rations, hardtack, rice, and tinned meat, were rationed to the ounce. Each carried a single carbine and a field notebook sealed in oilcloth. At night, they observed enemy movements. Lanterns shifting along the beach, distant murmurs of Japanese troops unloading supplies. On the 3rd night, they crept to within 70 yards of a bunker complex and counted 12 machine gun positions and a 75mm gun camouflaged with palm fronds. By radio, using low-power transmissions that faded into static within seconds, they sent back coded coordinates. At 6th Army Headquarters, the signals officer marked the map in pencil, confirmed fortifications, full garrison strength. Within 48 hours, Krueger approved the landing of the 1st Cavalry Division on Los Negros, with the Scouts reports providing the only verified data. When American troops stormed the beach on February 29, they found the defenses exactly as described. The enemy had been caught in mid-redeployment, surprised that their supposed stronghold was already mapped to the last sandbag. It was the Scouts' first success, and it would set the tone for everything that followed. In the following weeks, more teams deployed: Detachment 2 under Lieutenant John McGowan, Detachment 3 under Lieutenant William Nellist. Their zones extended across Manus, Hollandia, and 8 Each mission followed the same minimalist pattern: 6 men, no backup, no extraction guarantee. A mission would last 10 to 12 days, sometimes 20, depending on the distance to enemy lines. Their orders were always the same: observe, record, return. On one early operation near 8 Nellist's team stumbled upon a Japanese patrol, a dozen men armed with Arisaka rifles. Instead of retreating, the Scouts melted into the swamp, submerging themselves beneath a tangle of vines and mud. They remained motionless for nearly 4 hours as mosquitoes swarmed their faces. When the patrol passed, Nellist signaled 2 quick blinks. The team moved on, unspotted. That night, they radioed the position of the patrol's base camp. 2 days later, Allied bombers struck it precisely. Word spread quietly through the 6th Army: the Krueger Scouts could go anywhere. Their reports, written in meticulous script and filled with grid coordinates, began to replace aerial reconnaissance as the gold standard of battlefield intelligence. Intelligence officers described their work as ghost mapping, terrain sketches that matched reality within meters. But the Scouts themselves avoided recognition. They slept in the dirt, carried their own gear, and answered to no one but Krueger. Their only luxury was survival. Discipline was absolute: no fires, no talking above a whisper, no trail left behind. Even the Japanese rarely saw them. Capture diaries from the 4th Air Group later described phantom Americans who appeared near bivouacs, then disappeared before any pursuit. By May 1944, the Scouts had completed 9 missions. Not a man lost. The pattern repeated like clockwork: reconnaissance, report, disappearance. The results reshaped 6th Army operations across the Bismarck archipelago. Amphibious landings grew more precise, casualties fell, and Krueger's intelligence maps turned from guesswork to precision instruments. In the jungle, success was measured not by the bodies left behind but by absence itself. And the Alamo Scouts were becoming masters of absence, men who fought by never being found. By June 1944, the Alamo Scouts had become a phenomenon inside the 6th Army, an invisible weapon whose existence few outside intelligence circles even knew. The Pacific War was shifting northward, toward Biak and Nomphur, toward the long leap to the Philippines. General Krueger's orders were simple and absolute: find the enemy before he finds us. For the Scouts, that meant slipping through the seams of Japanese defense lines and charting paths where no American patrol had yet dared to go. Detachment 4, under Lieutenant William Nellist, received one such assignment: infiltrate Biak Island's western sector, where Japanese engineers were rumored to be carving new airstrips into coral ridges. The mission brief contained 2 sentences: confirm existence of airfields. Report by coded radio within 5 days. That was all. They departed from Alandia before dawn on June 4, 6 men packed into a black-painted PT boat, the spray cold and metallic in the early dark. The shoreline of Biak rose like a wall of green and stone, reefs white with breakers, cliffs stacked in limestone terraces. The team slipped ashore at low tide, hauling their packs above the surf, then vanished into the jungle's wet silence. The terrain punished them immediately. Biak's limestone underlay fractured into razor ridges, movement was slow, hands bloodied from sharp rock. Heat rose like steam from the earth. Within hours, their uniforms were stiff with salt. The jungle's density devoured sound. Even birds fell silent when they passed. For 5 days they crawled, each night marking progress by compass bearing in moonlight. On the 4th night, they reached the ridge line overlooking Makmer airfield, and froze. Below them lay exactly what Krueger's aerial photographs had failed to show, a complex of freshly carved runways, still under construction but already functional. Dozens of aircraft, Zero fighters and twin-engine bombers, were dispersed under camouflage netting. Searchlights swept the field in measured intervals, and Japanese engineers moved in disciplined rows, guided by lanterns. Nellist recorded everything. Using a lensless field scope, he traced the perimeter, noting hangar shapes, supply dumps, and anti-aircraft batteries. Each sketch was sealed in oilcloth, coded, and transmitted by hand-cranked radio at 0200 hours. The report reached Hollandia the next morning. Within 48 hours, 5th Air Force launched a precision strike, 6 squadrons of B-25s and P-38s that turned Makmer into a cratered ruin. The Alamo Scouts watched from their ridge as the bombardment lit the sky orange. Shockwaves rolled through the trees. When the final explosions faded, Nellist quietly ordered, "We move." No photographs, no trophies, only the silent withdrawal of 6 shadows returning to sea. The mission had taken 7 days. They had not been seen once. Their return caused astonishment at Krueger's headquarters. Colonel Horton White wrote in his field log, "Target intelligence accurate to within 50 yards. No losses. Scouts continue to exceed all expectations." The Biak operation cemented the unit's reputation as the Army's most efficient human reconnaissance system. In July, Detachment 5 operated on Nome 4 Island, scouting air defenses before the landing of the 503rd Parachute Infantry Regiment. Again, their reports matched battlefield reality with uncanny precision. Pilots later remarked that bombardment maps seemed pre-sighted by ghosts. Yet for the men in the jungle, the work remained grinding, claustrophobic, endless. The scouts were constantly wet, boots rotting from fungus, rifles rusting overnight. Leeches dropped from branches onto their necks. Food spoiled within days. Water had to be boiled with halazone tablets that left it tasting of bleach. But discipline never cracked. To break silence meant death. To cough at the wrong time, to light a cigarette, to lose direction, each was a moral error. When they spoke, it was in whispers. When they rested, it was lying flat, faces pressed to earth. Each man carried a cyanide capsule, not as threat, but as instruction. Capture was not an option. By the time the Nome 4 operation concluded in late July, the scouts had completed 21 missions. Not a single man lost. The enemy still didn't know who they were. In captured Japanese records, officers referred to American spirits who moved through jungle lines unseen, leaving only maps and ruin behind. The Alamo Scouts were no longer just an intelligence unit. They had become a myth, a weapon shaped from silence and precision. And their legend was still only half written. By August 1944, the Alamo Scouts had grown to over 100 men, 6 detachments now operating simultaneously across the Southwest Pacific. Their unofficial motto, scrawled in chalk above the training hut at Finschhafen, read simply, "We find the enemy first." That same month, Detachment 2 received a new assignment that would test every rule they lived by: infiltrate Los Negros in the Admiralty Islands, confirm the location of a Japanese naval staff group, and extract without detection. The briefing took less than 10 minutes. Major Horton White unrolled a map on the table inside the canvas tent, the edges curling from humidity. "We have aerial photos suggesting remnants of the 1st Naval Base Force are regrouping here," he said, tapping the coastline near Lorengau. "We need proof before Krueger commits troops." He looked up. "You'll insert from the south." 7 men, 7 days. Radio silence unless compromised. Lieutenant Thomas Rounceville led the team. He was a quiet Georgian, barely 30, with the habit of chewing tobacco when deep in thought. His second-in-command, Sergeant Earl Walters, carried a battered M1 carbine wrapped in black tape. The rest, Snyder, Wesson, Baker, and 2 Filipino scouts, Gomez and Farinas, were veterans of New Guinea operations. They knew what 7 days in jungle meant: heat, rot, and absolute silence. On August 12, they boarded a PBY Catalina under a moonless sky. The pilot killed his lights 15 miles offshore, dropping them in a rubber raft. The sea was black glass. Their oars made no sound. Ahead, the island loomed, dense rainforest rising straight from the surf, the air already heavy with the smell of mangrove decay. They paddled in slow rhythm, timing each stroke to the roll of the waves. By dawn, they were inland, moving through swamp and pandanus groves. Mosquitoes swarmed thick as smoke. They navigated by compass and instinct, checking bearings every 100 yards. Twice they heard Japanese patrols, a clipped conversation, the metallic click of a bolt-action rifle, but the enemy passed within 10 yards, oblivious. The scouts froze, faces against roots, breath held. When danger moved on, they continued as if nothing had happened. On the 3rd day, they found the objective. Through binoculars, Rounceville observed a cluster of thatched buildings beside a small inlet, radio masts, fuel drums, camouflaged storage sheds. Japanese officers in khaki walked between them with notebooks in hand. A flag bearing the rising sun hung limp over the central hut. They counted 26 personnel. One wore the insignia of a commander, likely the naval staff officer they were sent to locate. They recorded sketches and coordinates on waterproof paper. At dusk, Gomez tapped out a coded transmission from a hidden position using a miniature SCR-694 radio, objective confirmed. 20+ enemy. Grid 77 to 93. The message reached 6th Army headquarters less than 3 hours later. At dawn the next day, the silence broke. A formation of A-20 Havocs screamed overhead, dropping parafrag bombs that shattered the inlet and ignited the fuel drums. Flames climbed into the canopy. The scouts withdrew immediately, moving north through a maze of gullies. Behind them, the jungle burned with dull explosions. The air smelled of scorched rubber and salt. 2 miles out, they encountered a stranded Japanese corporal, wounded and delirious. Walters aimed his carbine, but the man only raised his hand weakly and whispered, "Kage no Senshi, warriors of shadow." It was the first time the scouts heard the name their enemy had given them. Extraction came that night by PT boat. When they reached Finschhafen, every man's uniform was in tatters. They turned in their notes, cleaned their weapons, and ate in silence. No ceremony. No recognition. The official report listed it as Mission 27, completed August 18, 1944. Results: target confirmed. Enemy force neutralized. No casualties. By now, such perfection had become ordinary. Yet beneath the statistics, something was changing. The scouts were beginning to sense their role shifting, from reconnaissance to prelude. Each success drew them closer to missions that would no longer end at observation, but at the razor edge of combat itself. The Luzon campaign was still months away when the Alamo Scouts received the message that would define their legend. It came on November 23, 1944, stamped top secret, immediate priority. General Walter Krueger wanted confirmation of reports that Japanese forces on Leyte were retreating through the Ormoc Valley, preparing for a counterattack that could stall MacArthur's entire Philippine invasion. The 6th Army needed eyes, real eyes, behind those lines. Lieutenant Nellist and Captain Robert Prince were chosen to lead 2 detachments, 12 men in total. The mission: infiltrate enemy territory north of Ormoc, locate supply columns and command posts, and return with coordinates for airstrikes. It was calculated to last 5 days. It would take 9. They departed from Bay at 0200 hours aboard 2 rubber boats, the surf whispering against volcanic sand. The scouts paddled silently toward a black shoreline where enemy sentries were rumored to patrol. Behind them, the entire bay glowed faintly with the orange arcs of artillery, Leyte's western front in full battle. Ahead was only jungle. By dawn, the men were deep inland. The terrain was unlike New Guinea's flat swamps. Leyte was vertical. Bamboo thickets climbed the hills like wire. Ridges broke into ravines slick with rain. Moving 1 mile could take 2 hours. The scouts advanced by compass and instinct, crawling through ferns and creepers that stank of rot. They spoke little. Even whispers could carry down a valley like a bell. On the second day, they found proof of the Japanese retreat, a convoy of trucks mired in mud, soldiers unloading crates of ammunition by hand. Nearby, Filipino villagers, gaunt, barefoot, were forced to dig trenches under guard. The scouts counted 40 soldiers, 5 trucks, 2 light machine guns. Nellist sketched the scene, then carefully photographed it with a compact Bell and Howell camera no larger than a canteen. That night, they transmitted their coordinates through a portable radio, the code clicks masked by the hiss of the rain. 12 hours later, the sky answered. A squadron of P-38s roared overhead, their bombs stitching the valley with flame. Nellist's men watched from a ridge less than 1,000 yards away as the ammunition trucks erupted in a chain of explosions that sent shockwaves through the forest. The Filipinos fled. The Japanese survivors scattered into the trees. For 3 hours, the valley burned. When the last echo faded, Prince simply said, "Mission complete." But they still had to get out. Withdrawal proved harder than entry. The storm that followed flooded every gully, turning paths into rivers. The scouts slogged through waist-deep water, leeches clinging to their legs. Rations spoiled, ammunition rusted. For 2 nights, they survived on coconuts and rainwater. On the 4th day, Wesson collapsed from exhaustion, his temperature spiking from an infected cut. They carried him on an improvised litter made from saplings and ponchos, never breaking stride. On the 6th night, as they crossed a narrow trail, they froze, voices. Japanese. 24 soldiers moving by torchlight, barely 30 yards away. The scouts slid into the mud, motionless. A mosquito landed on Nellist's eyelid, he didn't blink. The enemy patrol passed so close they could smell the tobacco on their breath. When the last torch faded, the men exhaled as one. They reached the extraction point on the 9th night, thin, mud-covered, eyes hollow but alive. When they stumbled into the perimeter at dawn, the Filipino guerrillas waiting for them stared in disbelief. Not one man lost. The report that followed ran only 2 pages, Mission 43, Leyte Valley Reconnaissance. Result: enemy logistics destroyed. Estimated 300 Japanese casualties. Allied losses, none. But inside the headquarters at Hollandia, Colonel Horton White wrote a single note in his personal diary. They have moved beyond scouting. They are now an invisible army unto themselves. Within 2 months, that prophecy would be tested in the most daring rescue mission of the Pacific War, one that would finally reveal the Alamo Scouts to the world. By January 1945, the Alamo Scouts were no longer just intelligence gatherers, they had become the 6th Army's precision instrument for missions too delicate for conventional units. That month, a message reached General Krueger's headquarters from guerrilla networks north of Manila. Over 500 Allied prisoners were being held at the Cabanatuan POW camp in central Luzon. Most were survivors of the Bataan Death March, starved, diseased, barely alive. The Japanese were retreating north, and intelligence warned that the guards had orders to execute all prisoners if American forces approached. Krueger didn't hesitate. He summoned Lieutenant Colonel Henry Mucci of the 6th Ranger Battalion and ordered him to plan a rescue operation. Mucci's first call was to the Alamo Scouts. He wanted eyes on the ground, and he wanted them yesterday. Lieutenant Thomas Rounceville and 8 scouts from Detachment 2 were flown by light aircraft to Calajo, where they linked up with Captain Robert Prince and 120 Rangers. The operations scale was staggering, 30 miles behind enemy lines, across open plains, under constant patrol. But without precise knowledge of guard routines, fences, and the surrounding terrain, it would be suicide. The scouts' task was to make the impossible map. On January 27, the team began their infiltration, guided by Filipino guerrillas of the Hikbalahap resistance. They crawled for hours through parched rice paddies, the sun like a hammer on their backs. Every movement was measured, every sound deliberate. By dusk, they reached a bamboo grove overlooking the camp. Through binoculars, Rounceville watched Japanese sentries pacing the perimeter, bayonets catching glints of orange light. Inside the wire, he saw movement, men in rags, skeletal figures dragging buckets, one limping badly. The scene burned itself into memory. For 2 nights, they observed. They learned the rhythm of the guards, the change of shifts, the direction of machine gun nests. They counted searchlights and even the angle of their sweep arcs. Using a field compass and improvised measuring cords, they plotted the camp's layout to within inches. Every note was coded, every map sealed in waxed oilcloth. On January 29, Rounceville and his men crawled back under cover of darkness to deliver their intelligence to Mucci and Prince. The data was exact, and it changed everything. Prince's assault plan was refined to the minute: approach from the north, use a P-61 Black Widow aircraft as a diversion, and strike at 1945 hours sharp. The Rangers would attack the main gate, the scouts and guerrillas would eliminate outer sentries and cut communications. The raid began under a full moon on January 30. At 1900, the P-61 appeared low over the camp, performing a mock landing with its engines screaming to draw attention. At 1945, the Rangers opened fire. Machine guns erupted. Japanese sentries toppled from towers. The scouts, already inside the outer perimeter, slit the throats of the guards manning the telephone line before alarms could be raised. In less than 2 minutes, chaos consumed the camp. Rounceville led his men to the prisoner barracks, shouting in English, "Get out! Americans!" Confusion turned to disbelief, then to raw hysteria. Emaciated prisoners crawled, limped, and staggered toward freedom. Some fell to their knees, kissing the scouts' hands. Others wept openly, unable to comprehend rescue after 3 years of captivity. By 2015, the first prisoners were moving out, carried on stretchers, piggyback, or clinging to their rescuers' belts. Japanese reinforcements were closing from the south, but the guerrillas ambushed them in a firefight that lasted only minutes. When the last truck roared away, 512 Allied prisoners were aboard, none left behind. The Alamo Scouts had completed their 44th mission without a single loss. For the first time, their name appeared in the press. The Associated Press called it one of the most daring rescues in military history. In the debriefing that followed, Captain Prince summed it up quietly: "They gave us the map. Without it, no one would have come home." For the Alamo Scouts, Cabanatuan was more than victory, it was revelation. The world finally saw what they had been all along, the unseen hand that turned intelligence into salvation. After Cabanatuan, the Alamo Scouts could have been withdrawn to safety, decorated, reassigned, given rest. Instead, General Krueger doubled their workload. With Manila still under siege and Japanese remnants scattered across Luzon's mountains, the 6th Army needed constant eyes ahead. The Scouts were now operating in teams of 6 to 10 men, each with a Filipino guerrilla detachment at their side. They were no longer simply gathering intelligence, they were guiding entire battalions through enemy lines. In February 1945, Detachment 3 under Lieutenant Nellist was assigned to locate Japanese command posts along the Villa Verde Trail, a 30-mile mountain corridor that cut through the Caraballo Range. It was a landscape of sheer cliffs, mist, and rain, where visibility dropped to yards and every turn could hide an ambush. For weeks, artillery fire echoed through the valleys like distant thunder. The Scouts moved ahead of the 32nd Infantry Division, unseen and unheard. Their task was to chart the trail's defenses, bunkers, mortar pits, snipers, and the network of caves the Japanese had turned into fortresses. To the troops behind them, the jungle looked empty. To the scouts, it was alive with danger, tracks in mud, broken twigs, a faint smell of tobacco smoke carried on damp wind. Signs invisible to ordinary eyes. Each day followed a rhythm of exhaustion. They would move by night, rest by daylight under ponchos stretched across bamboo poles. Rain never stopped. Leeches swelled on their legs. Food consisted of rice balls wrapped in banana leaves. Their radios, packed in waxed canvas, were lifelines to the 6th Army, fragile instruments that had to remain dry at all costs. On February 12, Nellist's men intercepted a Japanese messenger party near a ravine. Using hand signals, the scouts surrounded the group, seized their satchels, and melted back into the trees before a shot was fired. Inside the bags were maps and coded orders from the 10th Division headquarters at San Nicolas, proof that the Japanese were fortifying the entire mountain corridor. The intelligence reached Krueger within 24 hours. Days later, American artillery began pounding the enemy's defensive ridges with uncanny accuracy. By late March, the scouts were everywhere. Detachment 1 was tracking troop movements near the Leyte Pass. Detachment 5 operated along the Ogno River, reporting enemy supply convoys to 5th Air Force bombers. Guerrilla leaders, once suspicious of American officers, now treated the scouts like mythic beings, men who could walk through Japanese lines untouched. But the work was taking its toll. Sergeant Earl Walters wrote in his journal, "We've been out so long, we move in silence even when we're alone. The jungle has its own clock. You forget what day it is. You just listen." Another scout, Jim Johnson, later recalled finding a Japanese officer's diary in an abandoned bunker. Inside, one line repeated in trembling handwriting, "They see us before we see them." That phrase haunted the men. It was both compliment and curse. They were proud, yes, but weary. After Cabanatuan, no mission felt safe. One mistake could end the unit's perfect record. And yet, they never faltered. April 1945 brought one of their last major operations on Luzon, the rescue of 66 civilian internees from Los Baños. Though the Rangers and Filipino guerrillas executed the assault, it was the Alamo Scouts who had first infiltrated the camp, sketching every guard post, every routine. Their data made the timing possible, exactly when the prisoners were bathing in the nearby river. The rescue succeeded without a single Allied casualty. When the news reached Krueger, he sent a single line of commendation to the Scouts' headquarters: "Flawless execution. Continue operations." But by then, they were already ghosts among ghosts, men who appeared only to vanish, leaving behind perfect intelligence, impossible maps, and an unbroken record. By May, the war's end was visible, though none dared speak it aloud. The Scouts had completed more than 100 missions. Not one man lost. Yet in quiet moments, some wondered if that miracle could hold. The jungle was still wide, the enemy still desperate, and even legends could bleed. The final months of the war brought no ceremony for the Alamo Scouts, only new orders, each more secret than the last. It was July 1945. Japan's empire was collapsing, yet scattered garrisons still held the mountains of northern Luzon, refusing surrender. General Krueger's 6th Army needed confirmation of enemy strength before redeploying to the Ryukyus. The Scouts, as always, would go first. Lieutenant Nellist's Detachment 3 was chosen for what became their 106th mission. The target, Kiangan Valley, Ifugao Province, a rugged, mist-bound labyrinth where General Tomoyuki Yamashita, the Tiger of Malaya, was rumored to have relocated his command. It was a mission that combined all their past skills: infiltration, mapping, evasion, and survival. It would also be their last. They moved out on July 18, flown north in a C-47 that dropped them at dusk near a guerrilla outpost along the Mayget River. The Scouts, Nellist, Walters, Snyder, Wesson, and 3 Filipino guides, began climbing immediately. Rain fell in steady sheets. Trails turned to clay. Visibility shrank to a few feet. Yet they advanced without pause, navigating by compass and memory. Each man carried rations for 10 days, an M1 carbine, a machete, and a small radio sealed in waxed canvas. By the third day, they were within the perimeter of Yamashita's retreating army, thousands of Japanese scattered through mountain villages, their discipline frayed, their uniforms in rags. Scouts moved only at night, listening for patrols, watching for fires. In the distance, they could hear Japanese engineers dynamiting bridges to slow the American advance. On July 22, the team reached a ridge overlooking Kiangan town. Below, they saw movement, columns of men hauling supplies under the glare of lanterns, trucks mired in mud, officers shouting in clipped commands. Through binoculars, Nellist identified a command post under camouflage netting beside the river. Its radio mast, its guards, and the patterns of movement all suggested the presence of a senior officer. They had found Yamashita's temporary headquarters. Nellist wrote the coordinates in code, then relayed the message to 6th Army using their field set. The transmission took 11 minutes of silence and tension as the radio's faint clicks carried through the rain. When confirmation came, Walters exhaled and whispered, "Message received." Over the next 2 days, they maintained surveillance, plotting enemy withdrawal routes and supply trails. The information would later guide the 32nd Infantry Division's encirclement that forced Yamashita's surrender weeks later at Kiangan. But the Scouts never witnessed that conclusion. Their mission ended, as all their missions did, in silence. At dawn on July 26, they slipped back through the jungle toward the extraction zone. Along the way, they passed a burned village, houses collapsed into ash, the smell of smoke still fresh. A single bamboo cross stood in the mud. No words were spoken. They had seen too many like it. The PT boat that retrieved them from the Mayget River mouth arrived under a moonless sky. As they boarded, Nellist looked back at the mountains, their peaks glowing faintly with distant artillery flashes. "That's the end of it," he said quietly. Walters nodded. No one answered. When they returned to base at Hollandia, there were no parades, no speeches. Their final report was typed in triplicate and filed under Reconnaissance Mission 106, Kiangan Valley. Summary: Enemy command confirmed. No contact. No casualties. Weeks later, the war ended. Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945. In total, the Alamo Scouts had completed 106 missions across New Guinea, the Admiralties, and the Philippines. They had liberated more than 500 prisoners, guided divisions through enemy lines, and delivered intelligence that reshaped campaigns, all without losing a single man in combat. When the unit disbanded that November, there was no formal recognition ceremony. Most returned home quietly, blending back into civilian life. A few joined the newly formed U.S. Army Special Forces, carrying with them the Scouts' methods and discipline. For decades, their story remained classified, their achievements buried in archives and after-action reports. Only in 1988 were they officially recognized with the Presidential Unit Citation. By then, many had already passed away. But among the survivors, one phrase endured, a line whispered across decades, written in diaries and reunion programs alike. "We walked alone, but never lost a man." In the long silence after the guns ceased, that record remained untouched. 106 missions. 138 men. 0 killed. A perfect ledger written in shadow, carved into the quiet heart of the Pacific War.